there is no stronger pair of allies anywhere in the world. Forget about the U.S. not having a stronger ally. There's no other example anywhere in the world of two countries that border one another that have the positive, lasting relationship that the U.S. and Canada have.
How can a set of skills lead you down the path to success? That's what we're setting out to answer on the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm your host, Michael Sangster. Join me as we unpack how leaders around the world have taken training and skills and turned that into a lasting career. Now let's learn together. Welcome back to the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm Michael Sangster, your host, and I'm excited to be joined today for our first repeat guest on the show, Dr. Jason Altmire, who's the President and Chief Executive Officer of Career Education Colleges and Universities, a national trade association involving private post-secondary career schools in the United States. Jason and I have become friends, but we're partners between the National Association of Career Colleges and CQ, working on some joint conferences, some joint events, programming, training, instructor training. There's a lot of interesting stuff starting to come out of our partnership, and really looking forward to having a conversation with him today. It's an interesting week to do this with everything going on between Canada and the U.S. that started on the weekend. I think we went ahead with having a good conversation today because we're partners, we're friends, and our two nations have had a long, long history of being great friends, and that will not change. We will get through the recent difficulties, and we will move forward. But I thought it would be really good to have a conversation of what's going on in our two countries and also what's happening at CQ. So, Jason, welcome.
Michael, it's an honor to be back. You're your first two-time guest, so that's a high honor. I appreciate the invitation.
It reminds me of the old first-time listener, long-time caller line that people used to use calling into radio shows.
Yes.
For those of you who don't know, Jason's also a former congressman representing Pennsylvania, if I'm correct, Jason?
Yeah, that's right.
Horrible plane crash on the weekend. I don't know how far that was from your old district.
Well, I fly into that. Oh, and you're talking Philadelphia.
Yes, the Philadelphia one. Yeah, plus Washington.
I represented the other side of the state in Western PA. The Philadelphia crash was awful. The DCA crash, the Reagan Airport crash, I fly into that airport, of course, all the time. I've probably flown into it hundreds of times over the years, and that's just awful. And our hearts are absolutely with the families of both of those crashes.
Absolutely. I've probably flown in 20 or 30 times into Reagan Airport. It's quite a unique flight path when you come in down the river, avoiding monuments and important buildings, isn't it?
It's beautiful. I mean, it never gets old. You come down that river. If you're coming from the north, and sometimes even if you fly south, they'll route you that way, and you see all the monuments. You come down the river and you pass everything that you recognize. And even when you come up from the south, it's an incredible view along the Potomac. So it's awful to think that, you will never be able to do that without thinking about what happened last week.
I have to say the Washington Airport's one of my favorite memories is that often are flying veterans in who are coming for ceremonies, and the airport will stop. I'm sure you've been there if you've been there as many times as I have.
Mm-hmm.
And it stops while the veterans come through and everyone applauds them. It's a pretty emotional experience, isn't it?
It's fantastic. They put up the balloons and the banners and the veterans' names, and all the families are there and they applaud. And often these are older veterans, Vietnam era or maybe even World War II era. And, sometimes they're older, not in good shape, and maybe in a wheelchair, and they're really touched by the show of emotion. It's fantastic to see.
Yeah, but the airport comes to a stop inside. It's quite interesting. But let's talk about. I think we might as well talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about what went on this weekend a little bit. We're focused on career training and getting people back to work, and we might be busy with some unemployed people in Canada. Due to these actions, which they're going to be looking for new starts or looking to take advantage of that time to train. But this is a pretty drastic moment between our two countries.
It's unfortunate. And there is no stronger pair of allies anywhere in the world. Forget about the U.S. not having a stronger ally. There's no other example anywhere in the world of two countries that border one another that have the positive, lasting relationship that the U.S. and Canada have. And for something like this to happen that can tarnish that relationship, where they're, the Canadians famed for their pleasantness and their kindness and generosity, for them to be booing the national anthem, not to be rude, but to send a message. They're doing it for the message that it sends. And I regret that, we're in this situation. Canada did nothing to deserve this. And, you and your listeners, and especially your members at NAC, have been such great partners for us as an association. And I've been to Canada many times in the capacity since you and I have known each other. And I've grown to love the country. I love the people. Been to many different cities. As you know, we've already held an event there in Montreal last year. We're in Vancouver this year. We're in Calgary in 2028. And I hate the fact that there's now a wedge driven between us. And I'll tell you what's going to be interesting, and this will probably, hopefully, be resolved by then. But next year, the World Cup soccer, the three countries, with Mexico being the other, are supposed to share the host duties of the World Cup. I haven't heard anyone talk about that yet, but I don't know how well that's going to play out if we're still if there's still such animosity between the three countries.
I hadn't even thought of that one yet. You're correct. I was thinking about our own events in May in Las Vegas that we've got planned, and then in Vancouver in November. This has become an important partnership for us. There's been a lot of lessons learned between our colleges, between our two organizations, and I think sometimes the learnings are hidden. It's a couple of college owners sitting in a bar in Montreal last year, getting new insights on different ways to do things and how to better take care of a student in this situation, or talking about a mental health program. So we'll find our way through this. There's no doubt. Great friends, you're right. It's unfortunate, the language. But the good news is, while Canadians are very angry right now, and I appreciate your words that we didn't get this thing started, but we may be very angry right now, but we're not angry at Americans. We know this is about a political leader, and this is not about our two countries and the way, but people are not happy. I was surprised to see at a home game here in Ottawa on Saturday night, as much as you were, seeing a Canadian boo an American.
Were you there?
I was not at the game, but I had it on at home and I saw it and I was shocked. And there was a Raptors game last night in Toronto that was very loud booing. People are angry, and I hope Americans understand that we just don't see this as our partnership. There's so many great stories between our two nations, whether it's World War I, World War II, Korea, Afghanistan, 9/11, and our trade has benefited both countries. That's why we have free trade deals. It doesn't help one partner over the other. And the ignorance towards some of the economic issues it's going to have a massive impact on both countries.
I remember when I was first elected to Congress, the first invitation I got after my election, before I was even sworn in, came from the Canadian Embassy in America. And they had me over for dinner very early. It might have been, I think it was my first week in office, once I was sworn in. Had a great dinner, told me all about Canada. And I've always felt kind of a connection to the country because of that. And I think that was the intent of what they were doing. You might remember I went to Ottawa on July 4th, which is, of course, American Independence Day, but it was the U.S. Embassy in Ottawa, and they hold a celebration on July 4th. And I went up for that and met a lot of the people that worked in the embassy up there, the Canadian citizens who work in the embassy. And I mean, it's really unfortunate that this has happened.
My team did have a chuckle that you got a better invite to the U.S. party in Ottawa than I got. We all had a good laugh about that in the office, but those are always great events. It is a great relationship, and we'll move past it and we'll figure out our differences. I hope this doesn't last long, and I know you share that feeling.
I don't think that it will. I certainly hope that it won't. And it's going to have lasting harm to the relationship, but I know we'll get over it in the long term.
I believe so as well. So let's talk about career education a little bit today too, because that's what we will do for a living is help these colleges do what they do. What does the Trump administration look like for the career education sector in the United States? I know you've got a new leader of the department. Has she been confirmed now, Linda McMahon?
She has not been confirmed, and as we speak, she has not even been scheduled for her confirmation hearing yet, although that is expected in February So she will probably be confirmed in the next month or so. It'll probably take about that long. Some people have been moving into the department over there, some other political appointees, but the secretary herself, it'll be another month or 6 weeks. But we've talked before, the Biden administration was not favorable to our schools. They had an ideological bias against the idea of for-profit education. Didn't matter if you were a career school or a 4-year online school or what type of programs you were offering. If you were for profit, the Biden administration kind of lumped everybody in to the same category and very highly regulated. You know a lot about that in Canada. And we had a positive relationship with the individuals over there. They had an open door and we shared information, but they had a different point of view. We feel like now with President Trump and the team that we expect to fill some of those spots over at the department, we'll have a much more fair look at the issues that are important to us. So we feel pretty good about the opportunity to make lasting change in our public policy in a way, because what's happened in America, of course, our system is very different than the Canadian system. And we play this game of ping pong where a Democratic administration will come in and they'll go off the deep end with heavy-handed agency overreach, regulation of our sector. And then a Republican will come in. Last time it was the first Trump administration, and they'll wipe away everything that was done before, start over. Then a Democratic administration comes in. It was the Biden administration, and they go further than they went before. And now the Trump administration is, and we don't want to keep playing that game. We want to solve the problem. We want to proactively have a discussion. What are the issues that are of concern to people? Let's have a realistic conversation about what public policy could be like to take these issues off the table and ensure that our students have the choice in education to pick any high quality program that they want and that suits their life circumstances.
The one thing we've learned about President Trump is that you have to believe his word. When he says something, you have to believe. This weekend proved that to Canadians. He's made some pretty broad statements about what he's going to do with the Department of Education, including disbanding it completely. What do you think? What path do you think he'll head down? Do you have a view yet?
That way, he's going to try. We have been hearing that there may be some announcements or executive proclamations of timelines and so forth, and commissions that are designed to study the government that are going to recommend doing away with the federal Department of Education. But it would have to run through Congress. And as you're aware, our Congress is very narrowly divided. The Republicans do control both chambers, but by a very narrow margin. And doing away with the Department of Education is not widely popular across America. There are some that support it, and it has been talked about previously. President Reagan supported eliminating the Department of Education back in the day. But it's really unlikely President Trump is going to have the support in the Congress to be able to move a complete elimination of the department. They could definitely downsize staff, which they've already done, eliminating dozens of positions and giving unpaid leave, I think, to hundreds of employees already. They could transfer the operations of the authority of the department in some programs to other agencies, but to do away with it entirely is really unlikely.
I'm intrigued. You mentioned how closely the two houses are held in a majority for the Republicans, but Mitch McConnell's become an interesting character now, isn't he? And how he's going to react to things. He could have incredible power, even though he's no longer the leader in the Senate.
The fact that he's not the leader has given him great freedom. He's up for re-election in 2026. He has not made any announcements. I think it's widely expected he will, in all likelihood, not seek re-election. And that frees him up. That gives him, the ability to do things. And there's really nothing that politically the Trump administration or even his own voters can do about it. So he can do whatever he feels is right and not be beholden to his party or keeping the Republicans together or even the impact on him politically. He's just an individual doing what he thinks is right.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting times ahead for sure. Talk to my listeners a little bit. We hear about it in the sector, but give us a little bit of an insight into the Pell Grants issues that you're dealing with, because I think we have our student aid challenges, but we hear the phrase, but we don't know enough about what you guys are going through. You're in quite a little tussle there, aren't you?
Yeah, and anything that involves public money, taxpayer funds, has been called into question. President Trump has created this organization that Elon Musk runs, Department of Government Efficiency, and they're tasked with reducing federal expenditures and limiting the size of government, shrinking the size of government. So the two big federal aid programs are the direct student loan program. So students can qualify for subsidized student loans that they have to pay back, but that runs through the government. Of course, Biden, they didn't have to pay a fair number of students didn't have to pay it back because the loans were forgiven. So an issue with that program is students now have an expectation or at least a hope that they can take out big loans and someone will come in later and tell them they don't have to pay it back, which is a separate issue. But Pell Grants are not paid back. They're legitimately a grant and they're income based. So the student, if it's a first time college student right out of high school, it can be the parent's income as well that's considered. But for our students, of course, generally non-traditional students, mostly adults, people who've tried something else before. So you fill out the form. It's based upon your income. You're awarded an amount, and you can take that money to the institution of your choice and use it to pay your tuition. And a problem that we have had politically, it's a wildly successful program. It has given educational opportunity to literally millions of Americans who would not have been able to pursue higher education because of their low income, came from a socio-economically disadvantaged background. But a problem on Capitol Hill for our schools is there's always a move when they increase the Pell Grant amount or they modify it in some way. There's a move by some in the Democratic Party generally to make our schools ineligible. So a student could not use their Pell Grant funds to attend a for-profit school. And we have been successful in lobbying against that and defeating that, but they try it every time. So this is an example of what I was talking about. We want to have the discussion. What are your concerns? How can we take this issue off the table? But the Pell Grant program is under great scrutiny now with President Trump because it is a federal expenditure. And the argument that's made is if you go to, I don't want to pick on anybody, but let's say the School of Anthropology or Film Studies or whatever it might be, masters in journalism, and you get a degree from a big state school, private university, whatever it might be, and you don't earn enough money to pay back your loan, should the taxpayer continue to subsidize that grant or that loan? And I think President Trump is going to have people taking a look at how can federal funding of educational opportunity factor in the utilization of those funds in a way that it benefits society, but it also benefits the taxpayers who are the lenders in that situation.
We go through similar discussions in Canada around some of our student aid programs, and they're federally funded and provincially funded. So I wanted the listeners to hear a little bit about that. It's funny you raise Elon Musk, because I noticed in the news this morning, Premier of Ontario in our little tussle has now canceled a big contract with Starlink. Made it very personal. They've canceled future procurement opportunities for American companies. They've shut down the selling already of any American wine, beer, liquor in their stores. But I found the direct shot at Starlink quite interesting. That's personal.
It's personal, and it's interesting to think about, but there are some industries, I would guess Starlink may be one of them, where it's not quite a monopoly, but it's pretty close. And if you want to keep up with technology and, communications access and all the rest, I'm sure Starlink and currently with their access to the president and, public policy, they're really going to tighten their grasp on some things. And it'll be difficult for folks to in the future, have telecommunications policy that doesn't include that. But I do think it's smart the way many of the Canadian provinces, and we saw Prime Minister Trudeau talk about this over the weekend, targeting sectors of our economy, geography within America for political purposes, so that the lobbyists who are close to the president or the administration, they're going to have their products targeted first. The states that voted for President Trump, it's going to be their industries that are the first to see the harm of the Canadian retaliation. So it's strategic in a way that it's designed to get the president's attention. I don't know that that's going to work, but I think that is the best shot Canada has to at least send that message.
Well, I agree. We saw the BC Premier actually say in his announcements, and the federal government's taking action, but some of the provinces, well, every province is taking their own actions too. Premier Eby stated, but we'll be targeting tariffs on red state products. He actually said that in that exact way. And if you think of trade from BC, Oregon, California, those are big markets for the BC industry. So it'll be very interesting to see how this all plays out for sure. And I think you'll see a concerted campaign now, focused Canadians talking to American companies, talking to suppliers, talking to our customers in many of those states to crank up the pressure. And you got to look at the automobile sector, where I can't remember what the number is now, but I think it's the average car, the parts cross the border 14 times. So we've seen Toyota and Honda already say we'll be closing plants quickly on both sides.
I saw the estimate that a price of a car purchased in America, if an American is going to go out and buy a new car this week, it'll be $3,000 more expensive than it was last week, just because of the tariffs.
So people will pay attention to this. So let's go back to the career sector. Let me hear, I'm interested in your views. I know what some of our trends are, but what are the trends you're seeing in training and the huge demand in the U.S.? I have to say, I listened to your podcast last week with Darnell Epps, and I highly encourage people to find Jason's podcast, The Career Education Report, and listen to this interview. What an impressive individual.
He had an incredible story. So this is a guy, he tells this story himself. I'm not speaking out of school. He came from a very difficult background. He spent some time in the penal system in America, went through difficult times, but righted the ship, got his life in order, ended up going to Yale Law School. So that's no small feat. And then while he was going to Yale Law School, realized he had an interest in the career education sector, especially the skilled trades. So he went to a large school, one of our members at CQ, Lincoln Technical Institute. So he would go to Yale Law School during the day and then drive fairly long distance that night and do his training at Lincoln Technical Institute. He had 2 kids, but he made it work somehow. He got his law degree. He got his certificate from Lincoln Tech. And now he started a business related to all this, how he can help pair students and employers and the workforce demand. I know you see this in Canada too. In America, for the programs that our schools offer is incredible. If you look at aviation technicians, auto technicians, the skilled trades, welders, truck drivers, the underwater construction, heavy equipment, nursing, the allied health professions, medical assisting, and of course, we have beauty and wellness and culinary too among our members, among other programs. But the demand for these programs is through the roof. And we've seen a dramatic change in public perception. It used to be in America, I would presume you might have had something similar in Canada, where it was viewed as sort of a disappointment if you didn't take a 4-year degree, if you didn't seek that traditional 4-year college path. That's no longer the case. People understand these are real jobs, high-paying programs that you graduate, you get a job, you're doing important work that society depends on. And just as one example, I mentioned truck driving. There's an 80,000 truck driver vacancy right now in America. There's a need for 80,000 truck drivers. Nursing, same way, skilled trades, same thing. So the ability of a student to pick the program that interests them in the educational setting that suits their lives. These are often non-traditional students, so they have families, they're working other jobs, maybe they've been downsized, they have other considerations, they're raising kids, so they can pick a program that fits. And that's what's unique about our for-profit sector is we're more innovative, we have greater flexibility to serve students' needs. And when a student graduates in those programs, they very often go out and they find a job that's going to be of great benefit to society. So everybody wins.
I can't agree with you more. We're seeing that. We had a difficult year with the federal government with some issues around international students, where we had to push back a bunch of preconceptions about our sector and misconceptions, which got us through. Once we got through it, we actually ended up in a better place because the media developed a better understanding of what our institutions do. So we spent the fall and into January talking about nothing but healthcare and the impact that we have on healthcare. I think it's starting to make a difference, but the demand is so huge that we're seeing for nursing, personal support workers, we call them, healthcare aides that work in long-term care, medical office assisting, where you actually are doing medical records, moving administration work through. And then the one that I'm finding really interesting is the number of rural dentists seeking help, dental assistants, dental office administrators, because they don't have the people to help them run their practices, and they're begging for workers because they're having to close practices where a dentist might be in 3 communities, a day in each, and they're actually having to close the practice because they don't have the workforce to help them run the practice. So it's interesting to spend time with these colleges and see the impact they're having. Because you're a second-time guest, we asked you on the first time about a mentor. So I'm going to ask you a different question today. We ask every guest about that. Talk to me about somebody. We're lucky, you and I, are having great boards, and we have board dinner. We're going to have a board lunch at our next event. We get to meet each other's board. Tell me a bit about maybe one of your volunteers that just blows you away with their commitment to helping other colleges and helping the sector generally.
Well, there's so many. I hate to focus on just one. We're very fortunate with our board. And the way we structure our board is we have 15 members that come from the school side, but then we do have a few board members that come from allied members, which are the businesses that support schools. And then we have 2 public members. And the public members are people who are not affiliated with a school or the sector directly, but they support the mission. So I think when you look across at our board, we have incredibly passionate people, and they're politically interested, of course. They have interest in public policy, but they come from, in our case, both parties. I know you have a different system, but we have Republicans and Democrats on our board. But generally, people understand that we fare better when the Biden administration is not in office anymore. But they understand the politics as well as the education side. So I don't want to pick just one, but these are people who come from very successful schools that have a long track record of student success. And they're able to bring those stories across all those different sectors that we talked about. And we meet together. They're competitors in some cases. They're in the same region. They're competing against one another. They offer the same types of programs. But when we're in the room together, it's a family. And I really like our board members, and I like our board meetings because we hash it out and we come to agreement, and we decide where we're going to be in service of the sector. And then we speak with a unified voice.
Well, it's interesting with online learning, we're finding some of our colleges are having new competitors too, with it. They may have sat at the table next to each other from different provinces on our board for a couple of years, but now they're training students in the other provinces online. So there's a new tension, but we're lucky too. They put it aside, they get out of the way of it, and they just bear down to do the work for the good of the sector.
Well, I've gotten to know your board too, as you've gotten to know ours. And I'm just so impressed by the quality and the passion of your board as well. And they
very
like
board.
each other. Yeah, they support the work, and it's inspiring to me to be around people like that. It helps me do a better job when you see the passion that they're bringing.
Interesting thing that's come out of it is some friendships, but also someone like Linnell Lynch, that she literally is involved in a theater company in La Jolla, California, that was the first American theater to show Come From Away, the great story about our two nations on 9/11 in Newfoundland, Gander, Newfoundland. So there's these connections, which may give me hope. We will get through this current situation, and we will figure out all this stuff with just a bit of noise for now. We got to give everybody a chance to find some off ramps and not get too dug in.
That's right. Well, we understand the situation, and I know that there are people who are frustrated, and that may or may not play into temporarily, our relationship, but with our associations. But it's been of great benefit. We share membership benefits across our associations. We attend events together periodically, bring our boards together, and there's been business deals that have been struck because of that. There have been schools that are now collaborating and working across the border, coming from both sides, and the students only benefit by that. So I'm very proud of the work that we've done together.
We've aligned on a training program for instructors. So now someone who's gone through our joint program, if they're a teacher in Houston teaching online, they can now teach at a college in Canada because there's a certification there that says they've met a standard.
That's right.
And our regulators are looking at that program right now, and we're getting a good reaction to it because it sets a standard. And when you're looking sometimes in these programs for very specific skill sets for training, you can't limit yourself to finding them just in your own city. You've got to go find people. I a great story of a program being taught in Newfoundland and Labrador. For those of you American listeners who might catch this, take a look at a map and see where that is, because you can't get much further from Vancouver, where the instructor gets up at 4 a.m. to teach a program 4.5 hour time zones away. And those are great. Those are great stories. So I don't know if Jason, if you've got any last messages before we sign off. I appreciate the chance to talk. Seems like I'm reminded every year of the Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times. I could use a little bit of boring lifestyle for a while. We seem to go from one thing to another lately, but anything that you'd like to add before we sign off for today?
Yeah, you say that is a proverb, but often it is referred to as a curse. May you live in interesting
Yes.
times. That's kind of,
True.
that's what they used to say when they were sending somebody away that they weren't very fond of. That was kind of their exit remark. But I've really enjoyed the relationship that we've had together, and have enjoyed working with your members. And our political systems are very different, of course, but the challenges and the type of students and the opportunity that we're providing is very similar. The programs are needed on both sides of the border, and the students are folks who are in search of opportunity and who have tried other things before and it hasn't worked out, or have gone through some sort of struggle in their life. And there's nothing like seeing the faces of graduates at these ceremonies when they've completed the program and they're ready to go forward with their careers. It's exhilarating. So that's why I like our partnership, is we face a lot of the same challenges. There is some differences to keep it interesting on the political side, but we as associations, and you and I personally, remain friends. And as you said, we'll get through the immediacy of what's happening right now for the benefit of our long-term success as associations and as schools and students.
I can't agree more. And you don't know this, but you kind of inspired me last year to get out. You're very good at getting into colleges. And you know as well as I do, it's hard to leave the office sometimes. It's hard to get out on the road and do some of that important travel into colleges. And my favorite moment are the grads, but it's quickly becoming some of the tours too, to see and walk by a classroom and see a group of 8 people, some of them often in their 30s, single moms, grinding away in a program to get through to change their life. So you're right. And I've noticed the way you, and now Kelly, you see here from your team doing a graduation speech that I thought was great. Those are wonderful opportunities to see what our colleges actually do. And I'm constantly challenging our politicians. Come on out, come to one grad, speak at it, and you'll see the impact of a graduation where it's the first person in the family to graduate from post-secondary, and they might be going off to become a administrative assistant or a legal assistant, but they're changing the path of their family and going, what I like to say, from a job to a career. So I'm going to leave on that, and I'm going to suggest to everybody, if you get a chance, we'll make sure we connect in the career education report into this post when we launch the episode. because the interview with Darnell Epps is inspiring to see what one person can do. And it's worth listening to the conversation between Jason and Darnell. It blew my mind, some of the things he's done. So Jason, thank you for joining us today. We will see you soon, and we will get through all of this noise, as we both said, right?
Thank you, Michael. Great talking to you.
See you again soon, Jason. Thank you. And I welcome everybody to join us again next week for the next edition of the EdUp Canada podcast. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to another episode of the EdUp Canada podcast. We release new episodes regularly, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you know when they are officially out. If you love this episode, please leave a 4- or 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts so that others can also discover how a set of skills can lead to success. Thanks for learning with us.